I had barely lowered myself into my chair at the dinner table when my daughter-in-law placed a printed list of house rules beside my plate. My son would not look at me. He only cleared his throat and said I needed to understand my place from now on. And then his wife smiled across the table, inside the home I had paid for with 30 years of labor, and said, "This house belongs to me now. My name is Harold Bennett. I am 72 years old. And for most of my life I believed a man's worth was measured by what he protected, not by what he owned. My wife Margaret taught me that she was the quiet strength in our small Ohio kitchen, and the woman who could turn a nearly empty pantry into dinner and a tired house into a home. When we first bought the place outside Columbus, the paint was peeling, the roof leaked above the hallway, and the backyard was more mud than grass. But Margaret walked through the front door, touched the cracked wall, and said the house had good bones. She always saw beauty before anyone else did. And for 31 years, I worked as a maintenance supervisor at a packaging plant. I fixed conveyor belts, motors, furnaces, and machines until my hands became stiff in the mornings. And I took double shifts when our son, Daniel, needed braces. I skipped vacations when college tuition came due. I sold the old fishing boat I loved when Daniel wanted help starting his first business. And Margaret worked part-time at a school library. She saved coupons in a tin box, packed my lunch every morning, and knew how to stretch $1 until it almost felt like $2. We were never rich, but we were careful. We paid the mortgage slowly. We repaired what broke. We planted a maple tree when Daniel turned 10, and every fall Margaret would stand beneath it and say the leaves looked like fire against the sky. And that house did not fall into our laps. Every board, every window, every mortgage payment carried a piece of our lives. Margaret chose the curtains. I built the back deck. We painted Daniel's room twice because he changed his mind about the color. And we hosted Thanksgiving dinners, birthdays, graduations, and the small Sunday breakfasts that made ordinary life feel holy. When Margaret died from heart failure, the house became more than wood and brick. It became the last place where I could still hear her humming while she made coffee. So when Daniel and his wife Claire offered to move in after the funeral, I thought it was mercy. I thought my son remembered everything his mother and I had done for him. I thought family still meant something deeper than paperwork. I was wrong, but I did not know how wrong yet. The first changes were small enough that I blamed grief. Daniel stopped calling me Dad in the warm way he used to. He said it quickly, almost like an obligation. Claire began walking through rooms with a measuring tape and pretending she was planning little improvements to make the house safer for me. She opened cabinets, checked closets, and once when she thought I was napping, I saw her standing in my study and staring at the locked drawer where Margaret had kept important papers. At breakfast, Daniel started asking careful questions. He wanted to know where the deed was. He asked whether the mortgage had been fully paid off. And Claire asked if Margaret had left a will, then smiled too quickly and said she only wanted to make sure everything was organized. They never asked whether I was sleeping. They never asked if I missed Margaret's voice at night. They asked about insurance, bank accounts, retirement savings, and whether my name was the only name on the house. At first, I answered plainly because I had nothing to hide, but each answer made them colder, not kinder. Claire began correcting me about where I could leave my shoes. Daniel moved Margaret's chair away from the kitchen window because Claire said it blocked the light. And one afternoon, I found boxes in the hallway labeled donation. Inside were Margaret's sweaters, her recipe books, and the blue vase she bought on our 25th anniversary. I stood there, holding one of her cardigans, and Claire told me it was unhealthy to cling to the past. Daniel looked away. That was when I first felt the floor shift beneath my feet. They had not moved in to help me survive my grief. They had moved in to erase the woman who made that house a home. One drawer at a time, then the financial questions became sharper. Claire wanted to know which bank held my retirement account. Daniel asked whether I had updated my beneficiaries after Margaret's passing. Claire started leaving brochures on the counter about senior communities, assisted living centers, and estate planning services. Each one was placed where I would see it, beside my coffee mug, next to my medication, or on top of the newspaper I read every morning. The strangest part was how polite they were when other people were around. When neighbors stopped by with casseroles, Claire held my arm and called me sweet. Daniel told everyone they had moved in because they did not want me to be alone. But the moment the door closed, their faces changed, their patience disappeared, their voices flattened. I became less of a father and more of a problem they wanted to solve. The night everything broke, Claire cooked salmon because she said red meat was bad for old men. Daniel sat at the head of the table, in the chair I had used for 30 years, and pretended not to notice when I remained standing with my plate in my hand. There were folders beside his glass, and Claire had printed them, color-coded them, and placed sticky notes on every page like she was preparing for a business meeting instead of dinner with her father-in-law. She told me they had discussed my situation. Not my grief, not my loneliness, my situation. She said I was getting older, the house was too much responsibility, and Daniel had a family to think about. I looked around the table, and there were only three of us, yet somehow I had become the outsider. Daniel pushed the papers toward me. He said, signing a power of attorney would make things easier. Claire added that she had already spoken with someone who understood elder planning. Her voice was sweet, but her eyes were hard. When I did not touch the papers, she leaned back and said the sentence that emptied the room of every memory I had tried to keep alive. This house belongs to me now. You are only staying here because we allow it. I did not raise my voice. I did not throw the papers back. I looked at my son, waiting for him to correct her, and waiting for even one trace of the boy I had carried on my shoulders through summer fairs and snowstorms. Daniel only stared at his plate. His silence hurt worse than her words. And Claire smiled as if my quietness proved her victory. She told me the guest room downstairs would be better for me soon, because the master bedroom was too large for one person. And she said Margaret's belongings would be boxed up over the weekend. She said Daniel needed space for a real family to grow. A real family, those three words landed somewhere deep in my chest. And I thought of Margaret standing at that same table, flour on her hands, laughing because Daniel had spilled orange juice on his homework. I thought of Christmas mornings, report cards on the refrigerator, and the nights I sat awake in that house, waiting for Daniel to come home from high school parties. I thought of every bill I had paid, every dream I had postponed, every ache I had ignored so my son could have more than I did. And still, I said nothing. I folded my napkin, placed it beside the untouched food, and stood. Claire's mouth curved in a small, satisfied smirk. Daniel whispered that I was making things difficult. I walked down the hall, past Margaret's empty chair, past the wall where our wedding photo used to hang, and into my study. My hands were shaking when I closed the door, but my mind was clear. That night, I stopped hoping they would remember who I was. I started remembering what Margaret and I had prepared. The next morning, I made coffee the way I always had. I sat by the window and let Claire believe I had been humbled. And she moved around the kitchen with the confidence of someone measuring curtains for a house she already owned. Daniel avoided my eyes. I let him. A man reveals more in silence than he ever does in anger. I began with the small things. I saved every text message Clint about signing papers. I kept Daniel's emails about transferring household control. I wrote down dates, times, and exact words in the old leather notebook Margaret had given me when I retired. I checked the hallway camera I had installed after a package theft. 2 years earlier, it showed Claire entering my study twice after midnight. It showed Daniel standing near the stairs as if he were keeping watch. I did not confront them. I ate quietly. I answered politely. I even let Claire tell me which bathroom towels I was allowed to use. She mistook my calm for surrender. That was her first mistake. 3 days later, I called Arthur Miles, the attorney who had helped Margaret and me update our estate documents 5 years earlier. His voice changed when I explained what had been happening. He asked whether I had signed anything. I told him I had not. Then he asked if I still had the blue folder. Margaret insisted we keep separate from the household files. I had forgotten about it until that moment. That afternoon, when Daniel and Claire left to meet their elder planning consultant, I opened the locked drawer in my study, behind old tax returns and Margaret's library retirement papers. I found the folder. Inside were copies of the deed, bank records, insurance documents, and a sealed envelope in Margaret's handwriting. On the front, she had written my name, then one sentence. Harold. Open this only if they forget love. I sat there for a long time before breaking the seal. Not because I was afraid of what she had written, but because I knew my wife. Margaret never wasted words. If she had left that envelope, she had seen a storm coming long before I did. From that day forward, my silence changed. It was no longer the silence of a grieving widower trying to avoid conflict. It was the silence of a man counting footsteps in his own house. It was the silence of someone who had been underestimated by people too greedy to notice they were leaving fingerprints everywhere. And Margaret's letter did not accuse anyone directly. That was not her way. She wrote about love first, about how proud she had been when Daniel graduated, about the nights we worried over bills, about the years we chose patience over comfort. Then the tone changed. She wrote that Claire had asked too many questions about the house during her illness. She wrote that Daniel seemed frightened of disappointing his wife, and fear, when mixed with greed, could make weak people cruel. At the bottom of the letter, Margaret reminded me of the trust. I had not thought about it in years because it had simply sat quietly in the background of our lives. Arthur had created it after Margaret's sister lost her home in a family dispute. The house was not owned by Daniel. It was not even held in a way Claire could touch. It was protected in a revocable living trust, with me as the controlling trustee until my death or legal incapacity, and with strict conditions for any future inheritance. The next morning, Arthur and I met in his office. He confirmed what Margaret's papers showed. Daniel had no authority. Claire had no claim. The power of attorney they wanted me to sign would have given them access to decisions they had no right to control. And worse than that, Arthur found something wrong in the document Claire had placed beside my dinner plate. The notary section had already been prepared, and my signature line had been copied from an old medical form. Arthur did not call it a mistake. He called it evidence. Then we went to the bank. The branch manager, a woman named Evelyn Price, remembered Margaret. She remembered her because Margaret used to bring cookies every December for the staff. And when Evelyn reviewed my accounts, her expression tightened. 2 withdrawal attempts had been made from my home equity line. Both had been denied because the bank required in-person confirmation. The requests had come through an online portal. Using Daniel's email address, there was more. Claire had visited the branch once with a copy of a draft power of attorney, claiming I was too tired to come in. The bank had refused to process anything without verification. Security footage showed her standing at the counter, smiling, dressed in a cream coat Margaret would have called expensive in the wrong way. And the truth came together piece by piece. The questions about the deed, the late-night visits to my study, the printed documents, the sudden interest in assisted living. Daniel and Claire were not trying to help me prepare for old age. And they were trying to remove me from the life I had built before I had time to defend it. Evelyn gave Arthur certified records. Arthur prepared legal notices. I made copies of every text, email, and camera clip. I did not tell Daniel or Claire what I knew. Not yet. The strongest trap is the one greedy people build for themselves while believing they are the only ones holding the tools. Once Daniel and Claire believed I had no fight left in me, they became careless. Claire ordered new locks for the back door and said it was for security. She moved my medications from the kitchen cabinet to a plastic bin in the laundry room because the kitchen needed to look cleaner. Daniel told me I should stop driving at night, even though he had never once asked whether my vision had changed. He said it in the tone people use when they are not asking but preparing a record. They moved Margaret's things faster. Her winter coats disappeared from the hall closet. Her favorite mug was gone from the shelf. The framed photo from our 40th anniversary was taken down and replaced with a modern print Claire said matched the room better. When I asked where the photo had gone, Claire said it was probably in a box somewhere, and Daniel told me not to be dramatic. Then came the basement. Claire announced that I would be more comfortable downstairs. She said the guest room would be quieter and closer to the laundry area. She said the master bedroom upstairs should not be wasted. Daniel stood beside her, arms folded, looking at the carpet instead of me. The guest room was cold, narrow, and smelled faintly of storage boxes. It had one small window facing the side yard. Margaret used to keep Christmas decorations there. I did not argue. I asked for 2 days to move my things. Claire looked disappointed that I did not resist. Daniel looked relieved. They did not understand that each insult was another nail in their own case. The following week, they invited a man named Mr. Caldwell to the house. He introduced himself as a senior transitions advisor. He wore a gray suit and carried a leather folder. But Arthur later confirmed he had no law license, no financial planning certification, and no authority to advise anyone about estate documents. Caldwell spoke to me slowly, as if age had made me simple. He said families sometimes had to make difficult decisions when older loved ones became confused. Claire nodded with the solemn face of someone pretending to suffer for my benefit. I asked him whether he had reviewed my trust. He blinked once. Claire's hand tightened around her glass. That night, Daniel raised his voice for the first time. He said I was embarrassing them. He said Claire had been patient. He said I needed to accept that life had changed. Then he made the mistake that sealed everything. He told me that if I refused to cooperate, they would have to prove I was no longer capable of managing my own affairs. I looked at my son and saw not a monster but something sadder. I saw a weak man who had let his greed borrow his wife's voice until he could no longer hear his own conscience. 2 days later, Claire placed another document in front of me. This one authorized Daniel to manage household assets, communicate with financial institutions, and make decisions about my residence. She told me it was only a formality. Daniel said it would keep the peace. I asked if I could read it overnight. Claire smiled because she thought the old man was finally ready to fold. I took the document to my room, photographed every page, and sent it to Arthur. By sunrise, he had replied with 7 words, "Do not sign. We are ready now." I chose dinner because that was where Claire had tried to take my dignity. It seemed only fair that truth should sit at the same table. I told Daniel I wanted everyone together on Sunday evening. I said I had thought carefully about the papers. Claire became gentle. After that, she made roasted chicken, set out cloth napkins, and wore the pearl earrings Margaret had once given her for Christmas. Seeing those earrings on her ears nearly broke my calm, but I held it. Some battles are not won by striking first. and some are won by letting the guilty walk all the way into the light. Arthur arrived at 6. Claire's smile froze when she saw him. Daniel stood halfway from his chair, then sat back down. A few minutes later, Evelyn Price from the bank came in with a folder under her arm. Behind her was my neighbor Tom Willis, a retired police detective who had known Margaret and me for 20 years. Tom was not there to threaten anyone. He was there because he had seen Claire throwing boxes of Margaret's belongings into her car, and because honest witnesses matter. Claire asked what was going on. I told her. I wanted to understand my place. No one ate. Arthur began with the house. He placed the trust documents on the table and explained that the property was protected, that I was the controlling trustee, and that Daniel had no legal authority over it. Claire said that could not be right. Her voice was sharp now, stripped of sweetness. Arthur slid the certified deed across the table. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Then Evelyn opened her folder. She explained the attempted withdrawals, the online requests linked to Daniel's email address, and Claire's visit to the bank with an unsigned draft power of attorney. Daniel's face went pale. Claire said she had only been trying to help. Evelyn placed still images from the security footage on the table. One by one, I watched Claire's confidence drain with every photograph. Then Arthur showed the copied signature line. He explained that the document presented to me at dinner contained a signature sample taken from an older medical authorization. He explained that the prepared notary section raised serious legal concerns. He explained that the matter would be reported. Daniel finally looked at me, for the first time in months. He looked like my son, not because he felt remorse, but because he was afraid. Claire turned on him first. She said the email account was his. Daniel said the documents were her idea. They did not defend each other. They did not apologize. They only searched for someone else to blame. I reached into my coat pocket and placed Margaret's letter on the table. I did not read all of it, and some words belonged only to me, but I read the final paragraph. Margaret had written that love without respect becomes entitlement, and entitlement without limits becomes cruelty. And she had written that, if the day came when our son forgot the difference between inheritance and ownership, I should protect myself without shame. The room went silent. Then I said the only words I had prepared. This house was never your reward for waiting for me to die. Claire began crying. Daniel whispered that things had gone too far. I agreed with him, and things had gone too far. The night he let his wife tell me, I was a guest in the home his mother and I built, they had gone too far when Margaret's clothes were boxed like trash. And they had gone too far when my grief became their opportunity. Arthur handed Daniel and Claire formal notice to vacate. Evelyn confirmed that the bank would cooperate with any investigation. Tom sat quietly near the doorway, not saying a word, but his presence made the room feel official in a way Claire could not talk her way around. By the end of that dinner, no one had taken a bite, and the roasted chicken sat untouched in the middle of the table, cooling beside the truth. The next morning, Claire was no longer measuring curtains. She was packing boxes. Daniel tried to speak to me alone, but Arthur had advised me not to discuss legal matters without him present. That sentence wounded Daniel more than anger would have. For the first time, he understood that he no longer had private access to my trust, my sympathy, or my weakness. The legal process did not unfold like a movie. There were no handcuffs at breakfast, no screaming neighbors, no dramatic police cars outside the house. Real consequences often arrive in envelopes, certified mail, bank statements, court filings, and quiet conversations with people who document everything. The bank opened a fraud review. Arthur reported the questionable documents. The attempted account access was preserved. Claire's visit to the branch became part of the record. Daniel's email activity became part of the record. The hallway camera footage became part of the record. Their messages to me became part of the record. Every small thing they thought was harmless became one more stone in the wall they had built around themselves. And the trust was amended. Daniel was removed as a future successor trustee. His conditional inheritance was reduced to a small amount held under strict legal supervision, and only if he cooperated fully with the investigation and repayment of any costs caused by his actions. Claire received nothing because she had never been entitled to anything. They had 30 days to leave the house. Claire complained that it was cruel. Daniel said they had nowhere prepared. I reminded him that I had been given 2 days to move into my own basement. Word spread, as truth always does in families. My sister Ruth called me crying, not because she pitied Daniel, but because she could not believe Margaret's memory had been treated that way. And Daniel's cousin refused to lend him money. Claire's parents stopped answering her calls after Arthur sent them a letter, warning them not to involve themselves in disputed property. Their friends, who had once admired Claire's polished stories, began asking questions she could not answer without lying. 2 weeks after the dinner, Daniel came to the house while Claire waited in the car. He stood on the porch like a stranger. He looked older than he had a month before. He said he was sorry. Maybe part of him meant it. Maybe he was sorry for hurting me. Maybe he was only sorry the plan failed. I could not know. And that was the saddest part. I told him I loved the boy he had been. I told him I mourned the man he had become. I told him forgiveness might come one day. But access would not. Love did not mean handing him another knife and trusting him not to use it. When they left, Claire did not look back. Daniel did for a moment. I saw his mother in his eyes, and it nearly broke me. But Margaret had taught me that mercy without boundaries is not kindness. It is an invitation to be harmed again. By the end of the month, the locks were changed. This time, they were changed by me. After Daniel and Claire left, the house became quiet in a way that felt strange at first. Not peaceful, not immediately, just quiet. Their voices were gone, but so were Margaret's. For several mornings, I walked from room to room with a cup of coffee in my hand, touching the backs of chairs, the edges of counters, the door frame where Daniel's height marks still climbed in pencil from childhood. A house can be saved and still feel haunted. I brought Margaret's things back one box at a time. Her sweaters returned to the closet. Her recipe books went back on the kitchen shelf. And the blue vase from our 25th anniversary returned to the dining room table, where the light caught it in the late afternoon. I found our wedding photo in the garage under a stack of holiday decorations. And the frame was scratched, but the glass had not broken. I cleaned it carefully and hung it back on the wall. For the first time in months, I slept in my own bedroom without feeling like I had to defend the right to breathe. And the legal matters continued quietly. Arthur handled most of it. The bank completed its review. Daniel agreed to repay fees and cooperate in writing. Claire tried once to claim she had misunderstood everything. But paper has a way of remembering what people try to forget. The documents, the footage, the emails, and the bank records told the story more clearly than anger ever could. I did not celebrate their downfall, and that surprises some people. When I tell them, they expect me to say I felt victorious, that I poured whiskey and laughed in the kitchen. I did not. I sat at Margaret's table and cried like a man who had won back his house, but lost the illusion that blood always protects you. Still, something inside me settled. Justice is not always loud. Sometimes justice is simply waking up in your own home and knowing no one can move you to the basement again. In the spring, I met with Arthur to create the Margaret Bennett Foundation. And it was not large, but it was enough. The foundation helped widowed seniors get legal advice before their families could pressure them into signing away homes, accounts, or dignity. And Margaret would have liked that. She believed practical help was better than pretty words. My neighbor Tom helped me repair the back deck. Ruth visited every Sunday. Evelyn from the bank sent a card on Margaret's birthday, with a note saying the staff still remembered her cookies. Slowly, the house began to feel less like a battlefield and more like a home again. One afternoon, Daniel called. I let it go to voicemail, and his message was short. He said he was in counseling. He said he had moved into a small apartment. He said he thought about his mother every day. He said he hoped that someday I could speak to him. And I listened to the message twice. Then I saved it, not as evidence this time, but as a reminder that some doors do not need to be locked forever. They only need to stay closed until the person on the other side learns how to knock with humility. I never spoke to Claire again. As for Daniel, I sent him one letter 6 months later. I told him I was alive, safe, and not bitter. I told him bitterness would give him too much space in the years I had left. I told him his mother had loved him with her whole heart, and that was exactly why his betrayal hurt so deeply. I told him rebuilding trust was not impossible, but it would not begin with money, property, excuses, or guilt. It would begin with honesty. I did not invite him home. Not yet. On the first anniversary of Margaret's passing, I stood beneath the maple tree we had planted when Daniel was 10. The leaves were turning red again, bright as fire against the sky. For a moment, I could almost hear her voice beside me, soft and steady, telling me the house still had good bones. And she had been right. The house had good bones. So did I. I was not the weak old man. Claire thought she could move around like furniture. I was not the burden Daniel tried to manage. I was a husband who kept his promise, a father who finally learned that love without boundaries can become surrender, and a man who understood that dignity is not something family gives you. It is something you protect. Even when protecting, it breaks your heart. That evening, I made coffee in Margaret's favorite mug and sat by the kitchen window. The chair across from me was empty. But for the first time in a long while, the emptiness did not feel like defeat. It felt like space. Space to breathe. Space to remember. And space to live the rest of my life without asking permission from people who had mistaken my kindness for weakness. And when the sun went down behind the maple tree, I locked my front door and turned off the hallway light and slept peacefully in the home Margaret and I had built.